Alright, welcome. If you're a new Psych student, it's great to have you. I hope that you're looking forward to, or you're already settling in really nicely in Year 12 and you've made a good start. Alright, so what we're here to do? Well, this is Galbraith does Psych, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about what the course involves. I'm going to break it down for you, try and give you some pointers about where to go, what to do, what sort of things to look out for. It's a great time to be a Psych student. The current AQA course has been going for nearly a decade. Schools and teachers are familiar with it. There are loads of resources out there online now and in print. But paradoxically, that can make things quite tricky and feel a little overwhelming when you start going out there to look online, do a search for the kind of things you should be reading and doing. So, as I said, I'm going to try and break it down for you today. Let's get right into it. So in this video, I'm going to start by telling you a little bit more about the course, the topics, the content of the course, talk a little bit about how that builds on GCSE and maybe fits with other subjects and the skills you're going to need. I'll talk a little bit about resources that I think might be useful in supporting you to study A-level psychology, a little bit about wider reading, what might happen after or beyond A-level, what options are out there, and some general kind of advice that might not have been covered in other sections. So you can skip through this a little bit if you are looking for something in particular, but otherwise just strap in, grab yourself a cup of tea and a biscuit, and let's crack on. Okay, so let's look at the course content briefly. What are you actually going to study? Well, AQA A-Level Psychology actually contains 17 different topics. Now before you start panicking, not all of them are compulsory, and schools will tend to pick which ones that they teach you. So you can see them all on the screen there, and you've got easy access online to the specification if you want to look at it broken down into bullet points, but I'll just give you a bit of a flavour about what these topics actually are about. Ultimately, psychology is all about trying to understand people and trying to understand to explain behaviour. So in each of these units, you're going to be asking big questions like, for example, in social influence, why does one person obey an authority figure while another person might be disobedient? In memory, you might be asking and answering questions and studying theories and research about questions like, how and why do we forget? And how do police interview witnesses to crimes? The attachment topic is about child development and the growth and the development of that bond between parent and child. And you might be answering or thinking about questions like, to what extent does that early childhood experience influence us in later life? Is it crucial? Are those bonds irreversible and all-important? The psychopathology unit is going to cover mental health and approaches to defining abnormality. And you'll be discussing questions like, what is normal and what is abnormal? How and why do people develop depression? How and why do people develop OCD or phobias? How do we treat these three conditions? In the biopsychology unit, you're going to be looking at how the brain and the nervous system as a whole are made up and how they work, how they influence our thinking and our behaviour. You'll look at the role of neurotransmitters and hormones. You'll look at stress. You'll look at sleep and how the brain is plastic, how it grows and changes and develops with experience. In the research methods unit, you'll learn all about the studies and the design of studies and the analysis of studies and data that underpins everything that psychologists do. The approaches topic is slightly different in that rather than looking at theories for particular behaviour, what you're doing there is looking at different perspectives on doing psychology. So you'll look more philosophically at, for example, what a biological psychologist might do and think, as opposed to what maybe a behaviourist or a psychodynamic psychologist, such as Freud, might think about a behaviour. And the final compulsory unit is issues and debates. In that, you're going to be looking at contemporary problems and philosophical arguments, such as things like, does free will exist? Is our behaviour determined? Should we be looking at behaviour holistically? Or is it okay to break it down for the purposes of study? The optional content is on the right of the screen there. And what's going to happen here is that I've clustered them into three. That's the order they appear on the specification. Basically, you study, or you have to answer questions in the exam anyway, on one from each of those triplets. So one from relationships, gender, cognition and development. One from schizophrenia, eating behaviour and stress. And one from aggression, forensic psychology and addiction. So it's a really diverse and interesting course that's got something for everyone there, I think. So what are the key skills that are going to help you to succeed in this course? Well, let's talk about the assessed skills that you need to show in the exam. Just like at GCSE and in your other A-level subjects, there are different assessment objectives that AQA are going to look for here, and you'll probably see them and hear them referred to as AO1, AO2 and AO3, but basically you're going to show knowledge of concepts, of theories and studies. You're going to have to be able to apply your knowledge, apply your skills to maybe scenario questions in order to explain maybe a behaviour or a finding that the examiner has given you. But within the application objective, that's also going to cover application of scientific research and maths skills, handling data, that sort of thing. The evaluation objective is going to cover skills like justification, discussion, synthesis, interpretation, critical argument and analysis of theories and studies. So that will cover things like essays as well in there. But beyond the assessed skills, what soft skills are going to be helpful on the course? And when I say they're going to be helpful on the course, also I should say that the course will help you to develop some of these as well. So things like resilience, work ethic, independence, critical thinking, curiosity, and your awareness of the wider world. You're not just going to be learning some stuffy kind of just theories from a textbook with no real world context. One of the things that you need to be able to do with your knowledge is apply it to real world scenarios. And you'll talk about, in different topics, you'll talk about maybe the impact on the economy of psychology. And that might include thinking about pressures on the NHS. It might involve thinking about what's going on in the education system or the prison system. You're also going to build an awareness and get to grips with some other real-world issues, both contemporary and historical. You'll talk about things like the Holocaust in social influence. You'll cover things like gender bias and culture bias and the impact that has on people, on participants, on studies and theories. Let's talk a little bit more about assessment now. So how will you be assessed? We've talked about the content, we've talked about the skills, but what do the exams look like? So, in AQA A-Level Psychology, there are 3 exam papers. They are 2 hours each, and you sit them all at the end of Year 13. In those 2 hours, there are 96 marks of questions. We'll talk a little bit more about types of question in a bit. So Paper 1 covers social influence, memory, attachment and psychopathology. Paper 2 covers biopsychology, research methods and approaches. And Paper 3 covers issues and debates, and then whichever 3 optional topics you're studying. All of these sections are 30 minutes, 24 marks each, except for research methods, which is 1 hour. It's 48 marks. And the thing about research methods to know as well is that it appears in all papers and can come up embedded or as a small question in any other topic in any other paper. So it really is a key one to get to grips with. Let's talk a little bit more now about questions and what kind of things are actually in the exam. What does it look and feel like? So there are 3 key styles of question that are in the AQA A-Level Psychology exam. Firstly, and perhaps this is a favourite, but it's the multiple choice question. Now, I want to point out it's only a couple here and there. You're not going to get A's and A stars just by doing multiple choice questions. You're not even going to pass just by doing multiple choice questions. But the point I want to make is that really don't rush those. Take your time with them, read them carefully because they're not written to be easy. Often there are some maybe slightly confusing wordings, but certainly it will be kind of questions that just at first glance the response looks right. But when you really think about it, you have to be really careful. They're quite challenging, yeah? They're generally not that well done because people kind of rush them and try and save the time. Just be careful with it. Read, yeah? And the short answer questions is the second type. And that's a typical kind of outline a theory or outline a study. It might be outline the procedure of a piece of research or the findings of a piece of research. It might be an evaluate question. You might be asked to explain a study, explain a theory, explain a concept. You might be asked to explain how a theory can be used to understand behaviour in a scenario, if it's an AO2 application question. It might be a calculate question, so you might be calculating a mean or a median, you might be analysing a graph or something like that, or a table of data. And as I said, scenario questions tend to be in there as well, somewhere between 1 and 6 marks. Yeah, so it could range from maybe just outline what a key word means for 1 mark, or it could be outline a theory or outline a study for up to 6 marks. And that's going to be, a third to maybe half a page, depending on the size of your writing, of detailed, accurate knowledge. The third type of question is the extended writing questions. Now these tend to be worded like outline and evaluate, so those are the 2 skills in that particular question, knowledge and evaluation. And it might be outline and evaluate a study, so you would talk about your knowledge of the study, how the research was carried out and what they found, and you'd be talking then about strengths and limitations of that piece of research. You might be asked to discuss a piece of research or a theory, and again it feels very much like the outline and evaluate one, and that's your kind of essays. Now we call them essays, or students tend to call them essays, but they're not really, because to be honest you don't really need to be writing introductions and conclusions. There isn't really the time and the emphasis on that in the AQA A-level. When I say essays, what we're talking about is maybe 2.5 sides of A4. It's up to 16 marks. You only get 20 minutes or so to do that in the exam. That might not feel like long. You will develop, and you will need to develop, a bit more writing stamina and writing and thinking speed. But we're not writing, 30, 40, 50 mark essays that are going to take an hour at a time and have introductions and conclusions, okay? And that's it. So let's think just briefly about GCSE transition. What are you bringing from GCSE study? Well, firstly, all the soft skills and the experience of being through public exams is going to stand you in really good stead for your A-level studies in all of your subjects. But you're bringing mathematical content. You've done GCSE maths. Even if you haven't done the higher tier, you're fine. The key things for AQA A-level psychology are things like your fractions, decimals, percentages, dealing a little bit maybe with ratio and proportion, or possibly using a relatively simple formula they might give you. And then it will be things like your data handling, graphs and charts, understanding correlation, being able to deal with averages and ranges, things like that. And you're bringing scientific knowledge from your either double award or triple sciences. And really that's your biology, so things like the nervous system, the brain, neurons, synapses, all of those things, neurotransmitters and hormones that you'll have probably covered at GCSE. But also, on top of the biology, it's the more general kind of science and research understanding. Independent, dependent variables, control, all of that sort of stuff. What else? Did you do GCSE psychology? If you did, great. But if you didn't, don't worry. If you did, don't get complacent. There will be a fair bit of overlap in some units, particularly to start with, depending on how your school organises the course. I'll point out a couple of examples. So social influence, memory, research methods do have, as I said, a fair bit of overlap. You'll have looked at some of the studies before. But there is, even in those topics, still going to be a nice amount of new content. And even on those studies, those theories that you've looked at GCSE, you will be writing and needing to think in more depth and detail at A-level to maintain the grades that you might have got at GCSE. So in those units there is some overlap, but there's also some entirely new content, and there are some things that you might have done at GCSE that we won't do again at A-level. Subject combinations. Now, it's fair to say that I think psychology fits with nearly anything, and every year, certainly, from my experience, we get students taking all kinds of combinations of subjects. So don't worry, there isn't a right combination of subjects to take with psychology. But I can break this down probably into 2 kind of sections. There are subjects that are genuinely going to overlap in content. Maybe not, entire units, but a lesson or two here or there, or a theory or a study here or there that might be helpful for you. So things like sociology and criminology, where you think about how maybe I'm thinking about crime and family and those kind of things, there will be some overlap. Health and social care, you look at things like child development and thinking. You'll study people like Piaget, who you'll be familiar with if you did the GCSE in psychology as well. English language, when you look at language acquisition and theories of language acquisition and development, there will be theorists there that you'll meet in psychology. In PE, if you think about things like coaching and modelling, social and observational learning, reinforcement, those kind of processes, you're going to study that in psychology and in PE. Similarly, in business, if you think about motivation, management, coaching, there's going to be some overlap in content there. Core maths is a fantastic subject to take along with A-level psychology, and it will really support you in the mathematical skills, of course, but also there's a big overlap in terms of the research methods element of psychology A-level. So you're going to be studying in core maths and in psychology things like how we recruit and select participants to take part in a study, as well as doing things like graphs and charts and analysing data. In biology, there's going to be a data and statistics element as well that is going to be very similar to psychology, but also you'll look at things like genetics and neurochemical factors that will help you in A-level psychology. It's going to be beyond what you do in psychology, but if you're taking biology, you will see some overlap. And then other subjects, possibly media. It also goes well with sociology, I think, media, but you'll study things like gender and culture in media and representations, a little bit of kind of social factors. And in philosophy, you'll see some overlap in things like talking about the value or the role of nature and nurture, thinking about free will and these kind of things that are kind of bigger picture kind of themes. Also, depending on what you do in your EPQ, that could be a really good thing to take alongside psychology. Right, other than overlaps in content and in knowledge, in theories, there are then a lot of other subjects that are really useful to have with psychology because there's an overlap in the kind of thinking or the skills that you're going to need to develop. And those are, other sciences and other social sciences. You've got things like maths, you've got law, economics, geography and history are also quite good in terms of that overlap in skills and thinking as well. But from these subjects on the right, there isn't particularly kind of theories and studies and stuff that will crop up in both psychology and those subjects on the right. Alright, so some useful resources to support your study. So I'm going to just briefly show you the main kind of core AQA textbooks for the course. Your school might use one or two of these, probably not all three. You don't need to use all three. The two sets on the left there are probably slightly more common than the one on the right, but they're all good textbooks. So what do they look like? There you go. The left pair and the middle pair kind of follow the same sort of style. So each lesson will probably be a double-page spread in the textbook, with your knowledge on your left-hand side of the spread. You can see there you've got key terms kind of exploded out into a different box, and then you've got kind of core knowledge, theory, studies kind of in a main box, and then there's other kind of introductory and nice to know and maybe little application things scattered around outside of that. The right spread will have, or the right side of the spread will have your evaluation and discussion and kind of other studies to help you to get to grips with criticising and supporting the theories and studies that you're learning about. The book on the right, the Jean-Marc Lawton one, probably I would say goes into a bit more depth than the other two books, and it's not an easy kind of, well, one lesson is just a page or a double page in the book. But that's not a bad thing. As I said, you get more depth, I think, from that book. But use what your school uses, because even though they're for the same course, the actual content and the order of things is slightly different, because beyond the actual kind of core named studies and theories in the textbook, in the specification, the authors are free to kind of choose whichever studies they want to help with, embellishing that content and evaluation. So do try and use the same book that your school recommends, otherwise you might get a bit lost. That said though, I think one textbook is fine, but if you're really aiming for, A stars and you want a bit of material to supplement your core book, having access to another textbook to dip into is a really good thing, I think. And sometimes it's nice just to see how other people have worded the same material to help you understand. What else is out there to support your study? Well, let's look at some key resources that I would really recommend that you get to grips with. The most important resource out there is the AQA website. There you're going to get the specification. It's really important that you familiarise yourself with that and what specifically is and isn't on it. There's lots in the textbook and there's probably lots in lessons that you'll cover because it's nice to supplement what you're learning for the specification, and you might need it to develop some discussion and evaluation, but looking at the spec will tell you what you can get specific questions on. What I mean is, if there's a psychologist or a theorist named on the specification, you need to know a lot of information about that psychologist or theorist. You might specifically be asked about them. Plenty of other material you'll be taught will be used in more open style questions or to evaluate, to criticise, to support that psychologist or theorist that is named on the specification. So do familiarise yourself with the spec. But there'll also be news, spec updates, links to other things that will be useful that AQA put out. And another really useful resource that you'll find there is past papers, but also the examiner reports for those past papers. So when the summer exams are out of the way, the markers, the lead examiners, they actually write a report that is then publicly available based on what people did in those exams and what got marks successfully and what didn't. They try to advise schools and candidates for future years, so make the most of those. They're really helpful for helping you with exam technique. I've mentioned past papers, but I don't think you can get all the past papers on the AQA website anymore. They seem to have taken off some of the older ones. Now, I would recommend using more recent ones because, things do evolve over the years, but do look out for other sites like Physics and Maths Tutor and places like that. It doesn't have to be that one, for other past papers and resources like that. Doing past papers is a really, really good way to practice, and try and do it under time conditions where possible. Beyond that, don't neglect your own school's resources, your own teacher's resources. Look on your school intranet, VLE, OLE, whatever you call it there. At my school, we use Google Classroom for most things. And people will put up there really useful and interesting things. So don't forget about what your own teachers are putting up. YouTube channels can be really helpful as well in terms of course coverage. If you've missed lessons or you just want someone else to explain what your teacher's been explaining, Psych Boost is a really popular one, probably the most well-known one. Alongside that, Tutor2U have all sorts of resources. They've done loads of exam technique, essay walkthroughs, revision blasts. They do live webinars in exam season that they then kind of save on YouTube for future students. So do have a look at their channel. Look at their website as well, because there'll be key definitions and key word lists for topics and all sorts of stuff going on there. They also do online courses. Some of them are free. I know they do like an intro course and a stats testing course. They do all sorts. A lot of it you have to pay for, but there are some good freebies on there as well. So have a look on the Tutor2U website. Then other people over the last few years have recommended people like SM Cartledge, Neo Psychology, someone was telling me about this year, as another good YouTube channel. And you can stick with me as well. Hopefully if you've made it this far listening to me, you can put up with me and maybe consider subscribing. I do largely exam style kind of questions and walkthroughs, talk about exam technique and skills like essay writing and things like that. So I don't focus so much on actual kind of lesson content. I do much more, as I said, exam technique and that sort of thing. So yeah, stick around. What else is good to know about? I would say the British Psychological Society's website is a really good resource. Not so much for actually studying the A-level course itself, but there's really good things to dip into there in terms of careers advice and university, all that sort of thing. Ethics and code of conduct is really good to look at. Wider reading, there's podcasts they do, I'll mention it in a bit. There's loads of stuff on there, and you can do like a student subscription to it. Because you're a student, you'll get really, really cheap. It's worth looking at.
Psychology Review magazine is also an excellent resource to support A-level students. It's specifically written for you guys. So have a look, Google it. It's by Hodder Education, I think they're called. You can get a print subscription. I think it comes every couple of months, maybe every quarter, something like that. Your school library may already do it or be willing to look into that. And you can just do it online as well if you don't actually want the physical magazine coming through the post. But often articles on exam technique, wider reading suggestions, interviews with psychologists, advice from examiners, all of that sort of thing, and lots of stuff linked to the spec. As I said, it's written for A-level students, so do have a look at Psychology Review magazine. Also on YouTube, there'll be lots of TED Talks and things, many from psychologists that you're going to study on the A-level course. People like Philip Zimbardo, Eleanor Maguire. There are loads of useful TED Talks on there that will supplement what you need to know for the A-level. So that on the left there is what the Psychology Review magazine looks like. As I said, really would recommend that. Psych Crunch is the BPS's podcast, and then the sister podcast of that from the American Psychological Association is Speaking of Psychology. So that might be worth looking into as well if you like listening to things. Those two, the British and the American psychological ones, aren't necessarily kind of spec linked. You know, they're not written just for A-level students, but they will be a really useful source of wider information. And some of it, of course, will support what you're studying directly. BBC do a podcast called, or a show called All in the Mind, which is another really good source of extra material, things to listen to. And you can also, as students, get free subscription to the Financial Times. Now, that's not just for kind of, you know, business and economics students and politics students. There's also some really other interesting stuff on there. You know, they cover things like health and well-being and medicine and all those kind of things that are interesting for psychology and other social science students. But on there this year, they've launched a psychology class. Now, what you'll find on there, if you sign up to the Financial Times free school program, or even if you just Google FT psychology class, you'll find articles from the Financial Times that come with questions that are linked to the A-level psychology specification. So you can try to, you know, apply what you're learning in psychology to articles that are about real life stuff that's going on in the world. So do explore the Financial Times as well. What else is good if you're looking for more kind of physical book kind of stuff? These three on the left here are really, really helpful, just kind of as a general kind of psychology book to have alongside your A-level study. I've got all three of these. I really like all of them. I would say the middle one seems to be really well known. You can find it quite cheap nowadays. Covers all sorts of things. Lots of it isn't directly on the specification, but it's really interesting kind of for wider reading. Just short kind of snappy topics and theories and stuff. That's really interesting. The one on the left I got very recently. It only came out I think a couple of weeks ago, and seems to be a really good, from what I've read so far, looked at so far, really good at covering stuff that you do need to know for the A-level. It is written specifically to support the A-level, and it doesn't just kind of look necessarily like a textbook. So I would consider, if you want a more kind of general overview support book, to look at that one. Super Simple Psychology. That seems great so far. More general kind of reading though, there are so many books that I could recommend. I've just picked out a few here that I quite like. If you're leaning more towards kind of neuroscience and biological kind of stuff, maybe look at some of David Eagleman's work. The Lucifer Effect is a fairly long book. I think it's about 600 odd pages off the top of my head, but it's written by Philip Zimbardo, and it covers his study that you will look at, the Stanford Prison Experiment. You'll look at fairly early on probably in the course. It's in social influence. And he also talks more generally about other social influence studies and other stuff that's going on in the world, or was going on in the world when he wrote it. And I would say that is a really good one to look at. The Lauren Slater book as well, Opening Skinner's Box, doesn't just focus on the work of Skinner. It talks about all sorts of different psychological studies that have been done over the last century. So that's another good one to look at. Okay, so beyond A-level, and I'll put some more links in the description to some of the things that I'm going to mention here. But here I'm kind of thinking about, you know, careers and post-18 destinations. So university, you've got psychology and other subjects that go with it. So what can you go on to do after an A-level in psychology? Obviously, it depends what your other subjects were, but you can just go on and do a psychology degree. That's what I did. But, think more broadly than that as well and think about what else is out there. It might be that you go on and do neuroscience, particularly if you've done, say, biology or chemistry. It might be that you go on and do speech and language therapy. It might be that you go on and kind of look at coaching or marketing or management or something like that psychology will link with. So psychology, like when I was talking about its links with the other A-level subjects, psychology can lead to all sorts of things. So be open-minded and look carefully at the modules that are listed when you're looking at university degrees, because they're all different. There isn't, a national curriculum when it comes to university degrees. Look at whether you want to do a BSc or a BA. And although this isn't like, a university advice video, I'm just mentioning a couple of things quickly. So a BSc is a more kind of scientific or research or mathematical kind of degree, whereas a BA is a Bachelor of Arts rather than a Bachelor of Science. And in that, it'll be a bit more essay-based or a bit more focused maybe towards languages or arts, as I suppose it says. In terms of looking for a psychology degree, ideally you'd want to look for one that's been approved or accredited by the British Psychological Society. Now, to get that approval, that means there needs to be a kind of minimum standard in terms of the content, but also there needs to be a certain sort of content in there. So if it's got BPS accreditation, that's a really good thing, because that means it includes things like some more biological stuff, which will be really helpful, and some more kind of research methods training, which is really good, yeah. So look for BPS accreditation. If you're looking beyond degrees, you can then go on to do, or beyond undergrad, I should say, you can then go on to do a master's degree. So it might be a Master of Arts or a Master of Science. That'll be another year. A lot of courses nowadays kind of get you to sign up to that, and it'll be a 4-year degree that is an MSci or something like that. After your master's or after your undergrad, you could then look at a PhD, so a Doctor of Philosophy, and that'll be a much more kind of research and independent type thing. That will probably take you another few years. If you're going into clinical psychology or, looking at working in the NHS or anything like that, then you might also look for the ClinSci-D, another another doctorate course that's out there. Some of those are funded. They can be really competitive, so it's worth looking ahead at those sorts of destinations and their requirements and typical offers if you're interested in that in the future. Lastly, on universities, league tables, do look at them. Places like the Complete University Guide and all sorts of other places every year publish their league tables. Do look at things like, student satisfaction, teaching, research, all of those different markers, but make sure you're looking at it by subject, because just because a university is, say, rank 10 overall in the country, for psychology they might be rank 2 or 3, or they might be rank 40 or whatever. So do try and look by subject, because it does differ. Okay, apprenticeships, big deal nowadays. There are all sorts of apprenticeships that psychology would be really helpful for. A quick word about apprenticeships though, they don't come out at the same time every year. There isn't like a central kind of, UCAS style service for apprenticeships. They can be quite competitive, and you'll need to work on things like CVs and interview practice more than, just doing a personal statement for university. But there's several things, as I said, that psychology A-level could be helpful for an apprenticeship. Things like working in the NHS and working with clinical psychologists as an associate. You could work as a wellbeing practitioner, an arts or play therapist. You could work in nursing or healthcare. You could work in education or childcare. You could go into business looking at doing marketing or management or HR, that sort of thing. So there's lots out there. You have to keep an eye on it if you're interested in an apprenticeship. Careers more generally. I know I've mentioned a few things there already, but you could go into an academic or research-based career if you're following, PhD or that sort of thing. Working in a university, lecturing. Education more generally, so you could go into teaching. A lot of psychology graduates do go into teaching or working in educational psychology. You could go into clinical psychology. I know that's a really popular, competitive one every year, working in the NHS. You could do counselling or therapy. You could go into the prison service and be a forensic psychologist working to assess or rehabilitate offenders. You could go into neuropsychology, working with individuals who've suffered brain damage, for example, or are suffering from neurological conditions and perhaps need either therapy or assessment. You could be an occupational psychologist working with businesses, and it might be working with employees, maybe to try to make work for them. Maybe they're returning from work, maybe they're suffering from stress or burnout. Or it could be about advising businesses, making their staff more productive or increasing well-being, that sort of thing. Or sports and exercise psychology and, I suppose, coaching and performance-based work. Final other tips and advice. So some questions that I commonly get asked: is there a lot to learn? Well, yes, I would say there is a lot to learn. Remember, it's an A-level though, and I wouldn't say there's massively more to learn in psychology than any other A-level. All of your A-levels will be challenging. But yes, there is a lot to learn. There's lots of theories and lots of studies to get to grips with. Do I have to learn all the case studies? Well, I could do another video about what a case study actually is. So really this question is, do I have to learn all of the studies? Because a case study is a certain kind of study, but not necessarily. As I said earlier, familiarise yourself with the spec, those specifically named on there, people like, you'll see Milgram, Zimbardo, Ash, those kind of people that you'll see those names on there. You do have to learn their studies in detail and be able to discuss them. I think when people ask this question, what they're worried about is, and you'll see this when you get into lessons, you might in a lesson learn one or two kind of key theories or studies, but then you might learn about half a dozen other studies that kind of go alongside that are used to support or criticise the main content of the lesson. And I think that's what the question is about, really. You don't have to learn all of those in detail. You don't have to learn the names and dates necessarily, although it looks good if you do know that. But what you're learning there is you're learning the point of that study, or you're learning the key finding from that supplementary study, so that you can use that, as I said, to evaluate the main theory or study that you're learning about. So you kind of have to learn a little bit about it, but most of the studies that you're going to meet on the course, you don't have to learn lots of details about. Is it hard? Well, again, it's an A-level, so they all have their own challenges, but yeah, I would say it's quite tough. Is it impossible? No, of course not. Is it super hard? No, I wouldn't say it is. But is it harder than a lot of people expect it to be? Yes, I would say it is. I think some people think that Psych is, a bit of either a bit of a DOS subject or a bit of a, it's just about kind of talking and thinking and it'll be lots of discussion. There is a bit of that, but there's a lot of scientific stuff to it. There's a lot of data stuff to it, statistics, all that sort of thing. And you can't waffle. You have to know your material. You have to know definitions and key terms, key theories, who's done what. You have to be able to write quickly and concisely at a high level. You have to, even in your written discussion, it's not about waffle and opinion. You have to make evidence-based assertions and have discussions based on research and other theories. It's not really just you kind of giving your opinion. So yeah, it can be tough. Is it hard? That's really subjective, isn't it? Is it worth it? Yes, it is. Is it a science? Well, I've probably answered that already throughout this video and just a second ago, but yeah, it is considered a science by the government and by sixth form, by universities. Have a look, yeah? If you're interested in a particular university course that talks about needing a science, have a look. Call them up if you really need to. But yeah, psychology is a science. Will I be okay if I didn't do GCSE? Yeah, you will. You'll be absolutely fine. As I said earlier, if you did do GCSE, great. You've got a really good foundation to build on. Sometimes what I see with GCSE students, though, is that maybe they do get in those early days a bit complacent and then feel a little bit out of their depth later on when they realise what a step up it is from GCSE. But yeah, you'll be fine if you didn't do GCSE. My school at the moment doesn't even have the GCSE psychology. So, a good half or 2/3 of our students haven't even had the option to do the GCSE. So you'll be fine, yeah, don't worry. Final tips. As I said earlier on in the video, do use exam board resources, particularly things like past papers and examiner reports, and familiarise yourself with that spec. Get a copy of it, break it up into a table if you don't have access to it kind of in a student-friendly form already. Tick things off when you've done them, regularly review them. Keep up from day one and plan your weeks. So in my school I talk about having a minimum kind of, if you've got 4 hours a week of lessons, then that should be a minimum of 4 hours a week of study outside of lessons per subject as well. And ideally, you'd be doing more than that. So you might break it down and have, or think about, like 4 hours of lessons, maybe 3 hours of kind of independent study and revision, maybe 2 hours of set homework from your psychology teachers, and then an hour of kind of, reading. And that might be wider reading, it might be looking at magazines, it might be, listening to some of those podcasts and things I've talked about in this video, or it might be reading ahead for your lessons. I really would advise before your lesson each week, if you know what content, and you should know what content is being taught that week, just take 5 or 10 minutes to familiarise yourself with that page in the textbook, have a look at the key words, that sort of thing, have a look at the key sections, and just make sure you know where things are and what some of those words mean, thinking about, have I met some of these words in other topics already? And then you won't feel so overwhelmed in lessons. Lessons will be quicker than at GCSE. You're going to have to cover more, and it's going to be, at more depth as well. So hopefully with these tips, you'll feel a little bit more confident, a little bit more secure going forward. Final words. Psychology, and I know I'm a bit biased, but psychology is a super interesting subject. It draws on a variety of skills and other subjects, and I think that's really good. If you're good at maths and English and science, you'll be fine. You'll be all right if you're not so great at each of those three things, but you do need to be aware that there is going to be, as I've said, that kind of maths and data element, that biology element, and that essay-based analysis and evaluation element. But I think that variety is really, really exciting for an A-level. It isn't for everybody. We do often see, we might get a load of people coming in on day one, but by the time you get to kind of week 3, week 4, week 5, we do see some people then deciding it's not for them. And that's fine. That's fine. It's a new subject for the vast majority of students. Just give it your best shot. But if it's not for you, that's where you need to just have those open conversations with your teachers and your student support team, your admin team, whoever it might be in your sixth form area. And that's fine. But give it a go. All right, I think that's me. That's been a much longer video than I normally do on the channel, but I was just trying to pack as much as I could into this, to try and help on board people in their first couple of weeks of Year 12, because I think there's so much out there, and hopefully you found what I've done today quite useful. Do give the channel a sub if you want to, stay up to date with what I do in terms of exam technique videos and all of that sort of stuff. Good luck. Hopefully you do enjoy your time with psychology. I think it leaves a lasting impression on most people. And there's something for everyone. But yeah, good luck with it. Thanks very much if you're still with me here. And I'll see you in another video, hopefully. All the best. Bye.